Let's be honest, for over a decade now, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been this just colossal achievement. It's a massive, interconnected world that has pretty much captivated all of us.
And you know, our source for today's explainer, Looper, really puts it perfectly. It's an incredible, sprawling saga that absolutely changed the game for blockbuster movies.
Because in a universe this big, I mean, some details are just bound to slip through the cracks, right? So let's dive in and explore some of the most baffling, hilarious, and kinda universe-breaking moments that, well, they only really make sense if you don't think about them too hard. Okay, so let's kick things off with the small stuff. You know, those moments where pure dumb luck or some very questionable tech choices are the real superheroes saving the day. So let's start with a small but honestly a pretty telling detail, the tech downgrade. Back in 2008, you've got billionaire genius Tony Stark using the most futuristic phone on the market. Makes sense. But fast forward to 2016, and suddenly he's using a mid-range phone that's mostly sold in Asia. It's just a classic case where you can see the product placement pulling the strings, and it's completely out of character for a guy who, builds nanotech suits in his basement for fun. All right, next up, let's talk about the magic of coincidence. Zemo's entire plan in Captain America Civil War, it all hinges on this one piece of footage. Now think about this. It was filmed by a camera, on a tree, on a totally deserted road, pointed at the perfect angle, and somehow the tape survived being shot. I mean, come on. Without this impossible piece of evidence, his whole plan is dead in the water. It's a coincidence so massive, you could seriously park a helicarrier on it. And that one, unbelievable coincidence? It's just the foundation for an entire skyscraper of absurdity when you actually look at the plan it makes possible. Let's be real here, Zemo's master plan wasn't genius. It was just incredibly, ridiculously lucky. It completely relied on every single person behaving in the most specific, most dramatic, and most unlikely way possible. I mean, by the time he puts his plan in motion, the Avengers are already fighting each other. He really could have just emailed the video to Tony and watched the fireworks from his couch. So now we get into something a little more serious. This is where you see major character development. I'm talking hard-won, emotional growth from one movie just seem to completely vanish by the time the next big team-up film rolls around. It's kind of what happens when you have different writers and directors all playing with the same toys. Okay, perfect example. Clint Barton, Hawkeye. At the end of Age of Ultron, he makes this huge, definitive choice. He hangs up the bow. He says, "I'm done." He's choosing his family over the fight, which gives his entire story this really powerful sense of closure. And then what happens? The very next time we see him in Civil War, not only is he back in the fight with zero explanation for why he left retirement, but he ends up a fugitive, locked away on the raft. That whole meaningful character arc, poof, it's completely erased just to serve the plot of the next movie. And the exact same thing happens to Tony Stark. Iron Man 3 is this deep dive into him overcoming his trauma, his PTSD, and realizing that his identity isn't just the armor. He literally has the shrapnel removed from his chest and walks away. But then Age of Ultron starts, and all that growth is gone. He's right back in the suit, building a world-ending AI and making the same old mistakes, all to set up the next big conflict. And yep, the pattern continues with Scott Lang. His entire motivation in the first Ant-Man movie is to go straight so he can be a father to his daughter. That's the whole point of his journey. But the second Captain America makes one phone call, all of that character development just goes right out the window, and he willingly becomes a fugitive again. The needs of the big crossover movie just steamrolled the logic of his own character.
Okay, now we're getting to the really big ones. These aren't just little character inconsistencies. These are the kinds of plot holes that start to challenge the fundamental rules and logic of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe.
So you remember the whole point of Civil War, right? The Sokovia Accords. They were created because all these world governments were demanding oversight. They were furious about the Avengers' collateral damage and their complete lack of accountability. But here's the truly staggering hypocrisy. The same council that gets so upset about a damaged building in Lagos had just a few years earlier launched a nuclear missile at Manhattan. Their plan was to kill millions of their own citizens just to stop the Chitauri invasion. Their moral high ground is, let's just say it's on shaky ground at best. So over in the What If series, we see the Tesseract, which, remember, holds the Space Stone, send Captain Carter hurtling 70 years into the future. And on the surface, that's a cool little nod to Captain America's original story, but it creates a massive problem for the rest of the MCU.
You see, the whole deal with the Infinity Stones is that they have very specific jobs. That's why there are 6 of them. If the Space Stone could also control time, the entire logic of Infinity War just completely falls apart. Thanos wouldn't have even needed to hunt down the Time Stone from Doctor Strange. He could have just done it all himself, way, way earlier. It completely redefines the rules for the most powerful objects in the entire universe.
And that leads us to what might be the biggest plot hole of them all. This one is so significant that the movie itself actually tried to explain it away, but in doing so, it only made the problem so much worse. Okay, let's just break this down. The Eternals' one and only mission for millennia was to help Earth's population grow, all so it could birth a new Celestial. Then along comes Thanos, whose goal is to wipe out half of that population, directly sabotaging their sacred mission. And the response? To do nothing. Why? Because they were told not to interfere. But Thanos' plan was interfering with their plan. It makes absolutely no sense. So after pointing out all these narrative shortcuts, these logical gaps, and these character resets, it really brings us to the most important question of all. And the source material here really hits on an interesting idea. Maybe perfect, airtight logic isn't really the point. Sometimes just the sheer joy of seeing these characters on screen together, like seeing Mantis join the Guardians of the Galaxy, is way more important than having every single detail of her backstory make perfect sense. And maybe these aren't just mistakes. Maybe they're a necessary trade-off for creating a shared universe on this insane scale. You have to bend the rules of one story just to serve the needs of a much bigger one. At the end of the day, maybe we forgive the logical gaps because the emotional payoff of seeing all these heroes together is just that powerful. So what do you think? Is the occasional bit of nonsense just part of the wild, messy fun of a comic book universe brought to life on screen? Or do these inconsistencies actually take away from the power of the story? It's a really fascinating question about how we all engage with these massive, beloved franchises. Thanks so much for joining this explainer.